So I am seated in this amazing Airbnb just outside of Washington, D.C., in the little city of Arlington, Virginia. And if I'm quiet, I can hear all these voices in the kitchen, cleaning up after a knowing dinner, which I'm so grateful that they're cleaning up and letting me do this show with you. I want to talk about the importance of community tonight. And there's so much that I've learned, even just in 24 hours being with folks. Um, this celebration that I'm hosting tomorrow turned into something so much bigger than I anticipated. I anticipated having some local friends get together on Sunday and just celebrate life. And I decided to invite a few friends from out of town. I really doubted that they would come, and they did. And so it turned into this like week-long sleepover, and it's been so much fun. And I just made it into a knowing like mini retreat, mini event, and it's been so fun, so meaningful. And there's some nuggets that I've learned throughout this weekend that I want to share with you because man, y'all, the most important addition to our lives is community. And I say addition because the foundation of our lives, who we are, needs to first and foremost be cultivated from the inside out. We can't that's why I say add on. Community needs to come on top of a foundation that is firm, that is secure, that's reliable, that allows for a house and a structure to be built. The who we are should be firm enough to then hold what we do, when we do it, who we spend our time with. If we are reliant on anything external to inform the foundation of our lives, I want to even be reticent as I say that. I don't want to be black and white. So I'm sure that there will be other things external that I have yet to learn, right? But y'all, even still relying on my husband, relying on a partner, those are the things that I think traditionally we've said, yes, build the foundation, and that person is an integral part of the foundation. But then what happens when that person is an integral part of the foundation? And maybe this is what's supposed to happen. So I'm just musing out loud with you. Maybe when a marriage ends, maybe when that person dies or leaves or a separation and break happens, maybe your life is actually supposed to fall apart. This is interesting. It's so funny? I think so much of us, so many of us live life in a way that's constantly preserving breakage, protecting breakage and protecting and preserving that which is within from ever experiencing pain. And we do this. Jordan Peterson talks about the protective mother. And I think it's beyond Jordan Peterson. I think it might even be like Sigmund Freud talks about the protective mother is actually the most harmful to her child because she never lets him fall. And so perhaps if we were to build a life, this is so interesting. This is going in such a different direction than I anticipated. Perhaps it is that if we live void of others in our foundation, sure, it won't crack and crumble when something happens with that relationship. Yet, perhaps we never even allow the full amount of intimacy as necessary. Yet, as I say this, I think of another analogy a friend gave me, and I believe that this is shared in The Prophet or by Khalil Gibran. And I'm not sure if it was in The Prophet or just he's the author of The Prophet. So it could just be a quote by him or a concept by him. Effectively, a relationship that is strong is effectively each individual acting as two pillars, and then you build from there. Then you've got your floor of the house effectively on these two pillars. So I think that as I'm just processing this with you, I believe the premise still stands that we need to have a firm foundation in and of ourselves, so that when my husband leaves, or like my sister when her husband died, we've got this ability to keep moving forward. My sister was as strong as was her foundation at that time, which she freaking killed it. She was amazing under such a weight of devastation. And so when we think about the foundation and fabric of our lives, what are we building? Who are we? To then allow for this layer of community. And I think that as I'm processing this concept of, living in a relationship with community and having them be an addition, and having the baseline and the foundation of our lives be strong, about predicated in who we are, That doesn't mean that the foundation doesn't need repair. It doesn't mean that parts of the foundation get old and outdated and actually need a new bit of the foundation added to, because frankly, there's significant parts of who I was cultivated to be in childhood that has needed to go. Parts of my foundation have actually eroded and corroded over time, and thus I needed to add new parts, new footings, new concrete, new cement to allow for that part of the foundation that grew moldy over time, that effectively outlasted that season. I needed to add in something new. And so if we look at the foundation which we're building, who am I is the foundation of the structure. And then what's the community that's being added on top of it that is so incredibly critical? We all know this quote: we are the sum of the top 5 people that we surround ourselves with. And actually, someone said this the other day, which I really, really loved. It's not just the people, but it's the energy that we surround ourselves with. And so if each one of us brings an energy, and I'm talking about when you're meeting someone and they come bounding up to you, you've never met them, but if they have a smile on their face and they're excited, you can probably assume the type of encounter you're going to have. If someone comes up to you and their shoulders are crestfallen and they have a scowl on their face, you've not encountered them. You have no idea their backstory. You have no clue as to why they might be looking that way, but you can sense the energy that they're giving to you. And so if we're surrounding ourselves by these 5 people, and consequently these energies, we can think of the areas in our lives, the financial, the physical, the mental, the spiritual, the emotional. How are each one of those categories of our lives being strengthened or weakened by the energies that our community are bringing into our lives? So it's not just the individual in terms of, oh man, they're really great with money, they're going to help me exceed in life in the financial area. Or man, they're another executive, they're really doing well with their personal branding, they're really doing well with their business, they're going to help me professionally. We have to consider the energy of the human being, because maybe they're excelling in business and man, they have so much gossip around the professional community. So that energy that they're bringing to their business and to thus you is effectively going to corrode, encourage, or strengthen us in some regard or capacity. And it all impacts the foundation. So as we think about this area of community that is the best and most meaningful addition to our lives, it's so critical for us to continuously looking back at the foundation. So as I'm sitting here after this wonderful day and 24 hours with these people, I'm looking back and I'm kind of assessing, how am I feeling right now? How's my foundation in light of just spending all this time with these folks? Y'all, I am looking back at last night. I went to the airport. I shared this on the Knowing Show last night, that I went to the airport and I realized I wasn't actually being present. I went to the wrong terminal, and I literally had to stop myself from racing to the next terminal and just take a moment and be present in the moment. And one of my best indicators to know that I'm not being present is that I don't remember literally what happened. I forgot where I parked my car. I forgot where I had my phone. And so these were little indicators to me that I wasn't being present. And what happens then is that I have a greater propensity to act out of alignment when I'm not being present in the moment. And so looking back over the last 24 hours, we had a knowing dinner last night. There was a 10-year-old little boy who came with a dear friend of mine. She brought her boy and her baby. And then there were 2 gals who came, one of them single, one of them married. She came. And then a couple came and brought their 12-year-old son. So all of us were sitting around the table. Actually, the couple and their son hadn't arrived yet. And the question that I posed to everyone was, what is one thing that we have to know about you in order to facilitate this weekend? And effectively, that's narrowing down what is really important about you right here in this moment. You know, when we ask the infamous questions of what do you do, who are you, in these community settings, usually it's such a broad scope, but that was such a fun question that allowed for each one of us to get hyper present. Like, what is important to me right now? What do they need to know about me? And I asked each attendee, like, what do you want from this weekend? What do you need? Because what we need and what we want are very different. And if we aren't meeting our own needs, there is no way we're going to be able to walk away. My hope and prayer for this weekend is that everyone walks away feeling full, full of food, of fun, and full of friendship. And so, if we're not meeting our own basic needs, and that is our job. And so, when we think about that foundation, for those of you who are just joining, when we think about that foundation of the house that is us, that is our job to meet our needs. And then it is our job in the secondary level, that is community, to effectively communicate our wants. And yes, we get to communicate our needs as well, but it's our responsibility. And I mean this, oh gosh, it is so important that we meet our own needs. And y'all, I had to step away a couple of times over the last 24 hours just to get back into alignment. I had a couple trips to the airport to pick folks up, and I realized I wasn't being present, and therefore I'm not acting in alignment. It's not that I was angry or doing anything crazy, but it was the fact that I literally wasn't present, and presence is the most important. Man, it's the most important thing. I really believe that presence has been the antidote to complaining. Presence has been the antidote to pride. Presence has been the antidote to living in a state of kind of in the future of fear. I can't emphasize presence enough. And actually, that's really my focus this year. So today we talked a lot about, so this morning we had a vertical alignment time, which is the time where we really go inward first. Vertical alignment is, let me get myself in order, myself, my soul, my spirit, and effectively aligning my behaviors, my mindsets, my actions under the hierarchy of my ideal, and thus under the higher order of the divine himself. And in that hierarchy, now the vertical then meets the horizontal plane, which is the physical, everything external. But first I need to align myself. And once I'm aligned, then I can go and immerse myself in the external world. And we started off with that today. And so we all sat around the table, and I asked them a series of 3 questions. And it was effectively 3 scenarios. The first was, close your eyes and imagine yourself in a room with white space. You're completely alone. There's no responsibilities. There's no expectations. There's no role for you to play. Who are you? Who are you when you're completely alone? And then I asked them to give, what are 3 nouns that you value most in that time of being alone? What are 3 adjectives about how you feel? Everybody answered. And then the next section was, okay, now imagine you're in a group with strangers. There's not really expectations because nobody knows you, but how do those 3 nouns change? How do those 3 adjectives change? How do you kind of shapeshift? And then next, imagine you're in a room with your family and closest friends. Now, how do you change there too? And it was so interesting, y'all. This was probably one of my favorite vertical alignments. It was interesting because so many people actually struggled with the exercise at first until they got to a various point in the journey. And so because I knew the whole exercise, it immediately got to me right away, because what I saw was the incongruencies. I was writing down how I show up alone, and I knew the next 2 were coming, right? How do I show up with strangers and how do I show up with my family? And I knew the incongruencies were coming. And it was so interesting watching myself in my mind's eye alter in different community settings. And y'all, when we analyze the foundation and then analyze how the rooms change, with this community or with that community, I want to build out this analogy more because I think that this is so critical about the shape shifting. Sometimes it's actually really important that we put on more so our professional hat with our business community than with our families. However, if we are shape shifting to the extent that we know it is rooted in fear, rooted in people pleasing, rooted in unhealth, that is when it is time to go in with the scalpel and kind of like, let's go ahead and refine. I love this. Michelangelo talked about when he was creating the sculpture of David. He said, I'm effectively chipping away who David is not to get to the integrity of David. And so that is why we do this work to go inward. That is why we take the time to assess and get that vertical alignment so that we're chipping away who we are not, that then we can present ourselves. Man, I just had this realization yesterday when I was on my way to the airport. I realized that my only responsibility in the horizontal is that I am truly present, because I found myself, I'm playing host And I just found myself going through this kind of awkward in between of being the leader, but then also not wanting to impose too much and be a peer, but also, ensure everybody has a good time. And then I just realized yesterday that there's so much relief in being present, because when I'm thinking about being the leader, I'm thinking about the next second, or the next step, rather than right here, right now. And so parts of this is, planning ahead and making sure, I've got the vertical alignment prepared so we can all sit down and move through something meaningful together. Yet my job and my role is presence. And that has never hit me to this extent as yesterday, which was, I'm not getting paid for this. People are actually in town technically for celebrating me, which is vulnerable in and of itself. And so my job is presence, and your job is presence, and we get to curate our lives, but from this point of presence that allows for then the integrity of the way that we show up with everyone horizontally to be rooted and grounded in the truth of who we are, rather than the performing, rather than the perfection. We're rooted in peace. And so this really impacted me over the last 24 hours of being in community and seeing how, when I moved out of alignment, how that changed the energy in the room. And I could sense when I was acting out of alignment, because there was an energy shift. And there were a few moments when I would step out and then come back, and step out and come back. And y'all, it's so important that we have a clear enough understanding of the foundation so that we can come back into alignment when we step out of it. Otherwise, we're constantly wondering, we're constantly questioning, we're constantly almost I think that there's actually kind of an anxious energy that we can bring when we're in community with people and we don't really know what's going to happen next or what people are thinking about us. And so, in being present, we're just here in the now. And I can look someone in the eyes and truly listen, rather than trying to anticipate what they're going to say, prepare what I'm going to reply back. And we're truly locked and loaded into this moment with the other person. And so we had this vertical alignment this morning. I would encourage you to do an assessment of all three of those questions. Who are you when you're alone? Who are you with strangers? Who are you with family? And what are the nouns that you value? And then what are the adjectives in regards to how you feel in all three of those settings? Where does it shift? Where is there alignment? I actually found that, so peace is a noun when I'm alone. And that peace actually really showed up when I'm with my family. And then the other two nouns showed up when I'm with my community, or with strangers. And I believe the other two the three nouns were peace, efficiency, and growth. And growth and efficiency are not present when I'm with my family, but peace and peace was, but efficiency and growth were when I was with strangers. Like, I just really felt like I could cultivate those nouns. So guys, we need to know what our values are to then be able to assess, okay, these values I actually can maintain when I'm with my family. These values I can maintain in community. And here's where these values fall. Here's where I actually am lacking the ability to maintain continuity of who I am with every single group with which I associate myself. And so the strength of our community, I believe we can see in a mirror of the strength of ourselves. Which groups do we lose ourself and our personhood? And in what groups do we really come alive and thrive? And why? Because I might really come alive in one group. Well, it's because I'm the head dog. That's a really good mirror, right? But we need to be able to assess, okay, I actually feel really confident in this group, but it's because there's ego. Or I feel really confident in this group because they don't challenge me. So if we understand what our core values are, and then understanding where they change and shift in regards to those that were around, and then understanding why, man, y'all, tracing the root why back to the genesis of the story allows for us to go into the past, reconcile what we need to, so that now our present is no longer corroded by the past and we can be truly here in the now. And then we can also look and say, oh man, okay, so I'm being super present. I also don't really like these areas of my life. I know my ideal. This is how I'm going to change it. So later today, we actually spent the afternoon vision boarding, and we created vision boards for our next however many years. I did 10 years. And then during our knowing dinner, we went around and said, we said what our 1-year goals are. So at this time next year, where will we be? And then we went around and I asked everybody, all right, what's the one thing that you need to continue doing? What is so successful in your life that you need to continue doing to hit that goal? And then what's the one thing that you really need to change, like significantly change in order to hit that goal? Because y'all, if we only ever focus on the weaknesses, we're going to actually stop doing the very things that are the gas in our tank. And if we fixate only on the good things, we're going to ignore the blind spots that are actually roadblocks in the journey. So this last 24 hours has been so incredibly meaningful to me in terms of growing alongside others. This was kind of a test weekend for me. And I told everybody this. I was like, I'm really excited to try to grow with people because again, those three nouns, peace, efficiency, and growth, are when I'm alone. But can I bring those three nouns into a curated container with this set of community? And can I continue forward with those three nouns maintaining their status? Which ones do I abandon? And y'all, I got to tell you, I had moments this weekend already where I felt really queasy in my stomach and I knew that I was abandoning one or two of my values. And in each one of those, I just sat sat with that feeling and then kind of realized what it was that I needed to learn, move into the next moment with, because there's multiple reasons why we could feel discomfort in our body. There's a book by Bessel van der Kolk called The Body Keeps the Score. Our physical body alerts us of the warning signs that our emotions know. So we have to tune into our body to know the emotion, trace the root why down to the truth. And then that's when we're in the past. How does that inform the present moment? Now, what does strategic action look like to ensure that I can, honor the past and what it's telling me, but also recognize that may not hold the same weight as it does now, but it's still a warning sign. Now, how am I going to show up in this moment so that I am present yet informed? Presence isn't this blind, like I just had this thought. Justice wears a blindfold. And I want to lean more into that. And I'm curious for those of you listening, if you guys know the backstory there. I actually forget. I have found that in my pursuit of truth, I have tended to cover my eyes and I've tended to ignore the hard spots about other people because I just wanted to love them. Yet justice and love are not opposing. The truth and love can coexist. And that's a big, and tonight, so when I asked everybody those questions of what's the one thing you significantly need to change? What's the one thing you need to continue doing, continue cultivating and nurturing in your life? For me, it was continue nurturing and cultivating vertical alignment. I love who I've created myself to be. I love who God made me to be. I love who I am. What I really need to change is the MO, literally modus operandi of how I show up horizontally. It is so easy to immediately just kind of notch down a few pegs, show up subservient, show up quiet, show up with my values altering, and it's all subconscious driven, right? And so I need to work on the intersection of maintaining vertical alignment in relationship with the horizontal. And what I'm realizing is that truth and love need to be working in tandem. Love does not supersede truth and vice versa. So as I look at my own year's goals and there's all these things that I mapped out in terms of what I want to do and where I hope to be in the next year, which I'm so excited about. Guys, this is part of the benefit of community. I was talking about my goals and I asked them and I was like, y'all, what am I seeing? And it was so helpful hearing people reflect back to me what is working. And then, we can come up with with the solution or with the next step on our own, but there's a verbal processing with other people that is so invaluable. And everyone here is a business owner or business in some regard. And by all of us talking about knowing your business, all of us talking about knowing your brand, all of us talking about knowing your audience, all of us talking about knowing yourself, there was dynamic conversation at every turn that allows for each one of us to walk away better. So my question for you is, who are those people that you're surrounding yourself with? Y'all, people flew in from Seattle, from Texas to Virginia just for a random weekend. I had this weekend in honor of my birthday and company anniversary, but it really was just an excuse to get folks together. And y'all, these knowing dinners, just an excuse to get people together. I cannot tell you how many people have been so touched, grateful. I'm one of them for these times where we can gather as a community, where there's a person just championing it just because we're all so hungry for community. And so, how are we taking autonomy of our lives, activating our own agency to create the life we want? If we're saying we want community, what are we doing to make it happen? How are we curating the rooms? How are we creating the containers to allow for growth, to allow for those nouns, those three nouns, our values, to continue to flourish and thrive, yet in community with other people? And then finally, how are we actually allowing them to serve as a mirror? I've I've grown in a lot of ways just by being around other people and seeing how I've moved out of alignment, what's triggered that, and being like, "Oh man, okay, I need to go heal that." So, with that, I hope each one of us really takes the charge and takes the call to assess the communities that we have around us. Where are we not taking radical responsibility over our own selves to meet our own needs? And perhaps that looks like cultivating and creating community. I will talk with you.